Women are not what you think. This is the truth that Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychoanalysts in history, revealed through decades of studying the human psyche. What if you discovered that everything you believe you know about the female mind is based on illusions and projections from your own unconscious? Jung invites us on a profound journey to unravel the mystery of the feminine that goes far beyond appearances. The anima, the feminine archetype present in men, and the shadow we carry directly influence how we perceive women in our lives. If you're ready to deconstruct your perceptions and finally understand the true feminine nature through Jungian revelations, this is the moment to open your mind to a transformation that will forever change your relationships. The relationship between men and women has always been complex, filled with mystery and fascination. But what if what men see when they look at women isn't reality at all, but rather a projection of their own inner feminine essence? This is precisely what Carl Jung discovered through his revolutionary concept of the anima. The anima represents the unconscious feminine side present in every man, a psychic structure that exists in the depths of the male psyche. It's not simply a theoretical construct, but a living force that shapes how men perceive, interact with, and choose the women in their lives. When a man encounters a woman who somehow resonates with his inner anima image, something extraordinary happens. He experiences an immediate, powerful, and often inexplicable attraction. What he doesn't realize is that he's not falling in love with the actual woman standing before him, but with his own soul reflected back at him. Jung observed that this projection mechanism is automatic and unconscious. Men project their anima onto women who match certain qualities that have been encoded in their psyche since childhood. The primary female figure in a boy's early life, usually his mother, creates the initial template for his anima. This explains why many men unconsciously seek partners who embody certain aspects of their mothers, whether they're aware of this pattern or not. The danger lies in mistaking projection for reality. When a man projects his anima onto a woman, he doesn't see her authentic self, her genuine needs, dreams, fears, and complexities. Instead, he sees an idealized figure, a goddess or a muse, who exists primarily to fulfill his unconscious psychological needs. This creates impossible expectations that no real woman could ever satisfy, leading to inevitable disappointment and relationship breakdown when the real person inevitably emerges from behind the projection. Jung described 4 stages of anima development that men typically move through in their psychological maturation. At the most primitive level, the anima appears as Eve, representing purely biological instincts and physical attraction. Next comes Helen, named after Helen of Troy, embodying romantic and aesthetic qualities. The third stage manifests as Mary, the Virgin Mother, representing spiritual devotion and wisdom. Finally, at the highest level of integration, the anima becomes Sophia, divine wisdom and complete psychological maturity. Most men remain stuck in the earlier stages of anima development, which explains why their relationships with women often become battlegrounds of projection and disappointment. A man who hasn't confronted and integrated his anima will continue to search for this idealized feminine figure in every woman he meets, never quite understanding why his relationships follow the same painful patterns. The process of withdrawing. These projections requires courageous self-examination. Jung emphasized that recognizing one's projections is among the most difficult psychological tasks because projections feel absolutely real to the person making them. When a man is caught in anima projection, telling him that what he sees in a woman is actually a part of himself seems absurd. The experience feels far too powerful and external to be coming from within. Yet this is precisely the work Jung prescribed. developing consciousness of these projections and gradually reclaiming them as parts of oneself. As a man becomes aware of his anima, he can begin to recognize how it colors his perceptions of women. He starts to distinguish between qualities that genuinely belong to the women in his life and qualities he has unconsciously projected onto them. The path to mature relationships begins with this crucial self-knowledge. When a man understands his own anima, he becomes capable of seeing women as they truly are, complex, independent beings with their own inner lives, rather than screens for his projections. This transformation doesn't diminish attraction or connection. Rather, it deepens it, allowing for authentic relationships based on mutual recognition rather than unconscious psychological needs. Jung noted that the anima also serves as the gateway to a man's unconscious mind. This explains why women who activate a man's anima often trigger profound emotional reactions, dreams, and creative inspirations. The woman becomes, in essence, a muse, not because she herself possesses supernatural inspirational powers, but because she has unlocked the man's connection to his own unconscious creative wellspring. This understanding revolutionizes how we view male-female dynamics. What appears as the battle of the sexes often reflects an internal struggle within men themselves, the tension between their conscious masculine identity and their unconscious feminine aspects that seek recognition and integration. When a man projects his unacknowledged feminine qualities onto women and then feels threatened by or attracted to these same qualities, he's really engaged in a dialogue with himself, using women as external representatives of his inner feminine nature. Artists and poets have intuitively understood this dynamic for centuries, often depicting their muses as semi-divine beings who inspire their greatest works. Jung would suggest that these creative men were actually encountering their own anima projected onto women who somehow matched their inner image of the feminine. Their creative output represented a dialogue between their conscious masculine identity and their unconscious feminine aspects. The journey toward wholeness requires men to recognize, honor, and integrate their anima, rather than continually projecting it outward. This process, which Jung called individuation, leads to psychological completeness and the capacity for genuine love, not the neurotic, projection-laden attachments that often masquerade as love, but an authentic recognition of another person in their full humanity. When a man withdraws his anima projections from women, something remarkable happens. He discovers the feminine dimension within himself. He becomes more emotionally attuned, intuitive, receptive, and creative. Qualities traditionally associated with the feminine that have always been part of his psychological makeup, but were previously disowned and projected outward. Simultaneously, he becomes capable of seeing women clearly, appreciating their actual qualities rather than using them as screens for his own psychological content. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. Jung described it as lifelong work, requiring constant vigilance against the tendency to slip back into projection. The initial recognition that one has been projecting can be shocking and disorienting. Many men resist this awareness, preferring the comfort of their projections to the challenging task of reclaiming disowned parts of themselves. But for those willing to undertake this inner work, the rewards are profound. Greater psychological integration, enhanced creativity, emotional richness, and the capacity for authentic connections with women based on who they truly are, rather than who the man needs them to be. In discovering and integrating his anima, a man discovers not only the mystery of the feminine, but the complete mystery of his own soul. The gap between who women truly are and who men imagine them to be represents one of the most profound psychological disconnects in human relationships. Carl Jung dedicated significant portions of his work to understanding this phenomenon, recognizing that men often interact not with actual women, but with phantoms created by their own minds. This veiled perception begins in childhood. From our earliest moments, we internalize cultural archetypes of the feminine: the nurturing mother, the enchanting princess, the destructive witch, the alluring temptress. These archetypal images become embedded in our unconscious, forming templates through which men filter their perception of women. Jung argued that these archetypal patterns are ancient, universal, and remarkably consistent across cultures, suggesting they emerge from what he called the collective unconscious, a shared psychic heritage of humanity. The cultural amplification of these archetypes compounds the problem. Through fairy tales, mythology, literature, religion, and modern media, these feminine archetypes are continually reinforced, becoming so deeply ingrained that they operate automatically, shaping perception before conscious thought even begins. When a man meets a woman, his mind unconsciously categorizes her according to these pre-existing archetypes, often causing him to miss who she truly is. Jung observed that this veiled perception creates a double bind for women. If they conform to the archetypal expectations placed upon them, the nurturing mother, the supportive wife, the innocent maiden, they risk losing connection with their authentic selves. If they rebel against these archetypes, asserting their complexity and totality as human beings, they often face rejection or hostility from men who feel threatened when women step outside their archetypal roles. This psychological dynamic explains why many men find themselves repeatedly disappointed in relationships. They fall in love with an idealized image, a projection crafted from their own unconscious material, only to eventually discover that the woman is not who they imagined her to be. This recognition often triggers confusion, anger, or a sense of betrayal, emotional reactions that have little to do with the woman herself and everything to do with the collapse of the man's projection. The journey beyond this veil requires conscious effort. Jung emphasized that true relationship becomes possible only when we recognize and withdraw our projections. This process is painful precisely because it confronts us with our own unconscious content rather than allowing us to locate it conveniently outside ourselves in others. When a man becomes aware of his tendency to project idealized or demonized feminine images onto women, he takes the first crucial step toward seeing women as they actually are. Jung noted that this tendency to project is particularly strong with qualities that remain unconscious or undeveloped in ourselves. When a man has disowned his own emotional vulnerability, intuition, or nurturing capacities, qualities traditionally associated with the feminine, he will project these disowned aspects onto women, either idealizing or demonizing these qualities. When he encounters them, this explains why men often simultaneously desire and fear certain feminine qualities in women. The path toward authentic relationship requires what Jung called shadow work, the courageous confrontation with disowned aspects of ourselves. As a man recognizes and claims the feminine aspects of his own psyche, he becomes less compelled to project these qualities onto women. He can then begin to see women not as symbols or carriers of his own unconscious material, but as complete individuals with their own unique constellation of qualities, desires, and capacities. Jung emphasized that this capacity to see beyond projections doesn't develop automatically, but requires conscious effort and psychological maturity. Many men remain trapped in projection throughout their lives, never truly encountering the women in their lives, but instead relating primarily to their own unconscious content externalized onto these women. This creates profound isolation. The Man remains essentially alone, engaging with his own projections rather than with the actual person before him. The veil of projection creates particularly destructive consequences when negative aspects of the unconscious are projected. When a man projects his own repressed anger, manipulativeness, or emotional volatility onto women, declaring these to be feminine traits, he not only misperceives women, but also avoids confronting these qualities in himself. This projection mechanism underlies much misogyny and gender-based prejudice, men attributing to women as a group qualities that they refuse to recognize in themselves. Jung observed that men who strongly idealize or demonize women are often those with the least integrated relationship to their own feminine aspects. The more a man has disowned his anima, the more powerfully it operates through projection. Men who are most vocally critical of feminine traits like emotionality, intuition, or vulnerability are frequently those most disconnected from these qualities within themselves. The journey beyond the veil involves recognizing that much of what we perceive as feminine mystery actually reflects our own unconscious material. Jung suggested that men are frequently both fascinated and disturbed by women, precisely because women mirror back to men the undeveloped or disowned aspects of their own psyches. When a man declares that women are impossible to understand, he is often expressing his own disconnection from the feminine aspects of his own nature. This insight doesn't diminish the real differences between men and women, but places these differences in proper perspective. Jung acknowledged biological and psychological differences between the sexes while emphasizing that these differences don't justify projection or stereotyping. Beyond gender, each person represents a unique combination of qualities that transcends simplistic categorization. The withdrawal of projections creates space for authentic connection. When a man begins to see women as they actually are, rather than as carriers of his unconscious content, genuine relationship becomes possible. This shift requires humility, the recognition that one's perceptions have been distorted by projection, and courage, the willingness to encounter another person in their genuine otherness rather than as a mirror of one's own psyche. Jung emphasized that this capacity to see beyond projection represents a crucial developmental achievement. The ability to distinguish between one's internal images and external reality marks psychological maturity. Men who accomplish this work discover that actual women are far more complex, nuanced, and interesting than the archetypal images through which they previously perceived them. This shift in perception transforms relationships. When projection diminishes, communication improves because men can hear what women are actually saying rather than filtering their words through preconceived notions. Conflict decreases because men respond to women's actual behavior rather than to projected qualities or intentions. Intimacy deepens because authentic connection becomes possible when we truly see the other person. The journey beyond the veil represents one of the most profound transformations possible in a man's psychological development. Breaking through projection allows him to discover women as they truly are, not as angels or demons, not as mysterious, incomprehensible beings, but as fellow humans with their own unique constellation of strengths, weaknesses, dreams, and fears. In this discovery, relationship transforms from a neurotic entanglement of projections to a genuine encounter between two complete individuals. The concept of the shadow represents one of Jung's most profound contributions to psychology. While the anima constitutes the unconscious feminine aspect within men, the shadow encompasses all repressed and denied aspects of ourselves, qualities we refuse to acknowledge as our own. For men living in societies that rigidly define masculinity, the shadow often contains feminine traits deemed unacceptable for male expression. This repression creates a psychological split with far-reaching consequences. When men disown qualities like emotional sensitivity, vulnerability, nurturing, receptivity, or intuition, labeling them as feminine and therefore inappropriate, these traits don't simply disappear. Instead, they retreat into the unconscious shadow, where they continue to influence behavior in ways that remain outside conscious awareness. Jung observed that what we repress in ourselves, we often react to most strongly when we encounter it in others. The man who has buried his own vulnerability may feel inexplicably contemptuous when confronted with vulnerability in others. The man who denies his own need for nurturing may find himself unusually irritated by expressions of neediness in women. These reactions reveal not rational responses to external reality, but unconscious encounters with disowned aspects of the self. This shadow dynamic explains much about troubled gender relations. Men who most aggressively reject feminine qualities often harbor the deepest, unconscious fascination with these same qualities. Jung noted that extreme misogyny frequently masks profound unconscious dependency on women, a dependency so threatening to conscious masculine identity that it must be transformed into hostility and rejection. The tension between conscious masculinity and the unconscious feminine creates what Jung called a contrasexual complex. The more rigidly a man identifies with traditional masculine qualities, rationality, stoicism, independence, aggression, the more powerfully his repressed feminine aspects influence him from the shadow. This influence manifests as seemingly irrational attractions, aversions, moods, and behaviors that appear to contradict his conscious values. The path of integration requires men to acknowledge and reclaim these disowned feminine aspects. This doesn't mean abandoning masculine identity, but expanding it to include the full range of human qualities. Jung emphasized that psychological wholeness requires embracing both masculine and feminine aspects of the psyche rather than identifying exclusively with gender-coded traits. This integration process transforms not only a man's relationship with himself, but also his relationships with women. As he acknowledges and develops his own capacity for emotional depth, intuition, and receptivity, he no longer needs to project these qualities exclusively onto women. He can recognize these qualities as universal human capacities rather than gendered traits. Jung observed that this integration process follows predictable stages. Initially, a man often rejects feminine qualities entirely, attempting to embody a one-sided masculine ideal. Next, he may experience fascination with these qualities in women while continuing to reject them in himself. Gradually, as psychological development progresses, he begins to recognize and tentatively express these qualities as aspects of his own nature. Finally, in psychological maturity, he fully integrates these qualities, expressing them appropriately, without gender-based inhibitions. This evolution mirrors broader cultural developments. Throughout history, societies have oscillated between rigid gender polarization and more integrated expressions of masculine and feminine qualities. Jung viewed contemporary culture as moving, however unevenly, toward greater psychological integration, with men increasingly permitted to express qualities traditionally labeled feminine and women allowed access to traditionally masculine domains. The shadow's influence extends beyond personal psychology into collective cultural dynamics. Jung noted that cultures, like individuals, develop collective shadows, repositories for qualities the culture deems unacceptable. In traditional Western culture, many feminine qualities were collectively repressed, emerging in distorted forms. Through cultural phenomena ranging from witch hunts to the idealization of the eternal feminine. The journey of integrating the feminine shadow involves confronting cultural conditioning as much as personal psychology. Men must question inherited assumptions about what constitutes appropriate masculine behavior, recognizing how these assumptions limit psychological wholeness. This questioning isn't merely intellectual but experiential, allowing oneself to feel and express qualities previously repressed. This integration process inevitably generates anxiety. When a man begins to express previously disowned feminine qualities, he typically encounters both internal resistance and external judgment. Internally, he may experience shame or fear as he transgresses internalized norms of masculinity. Externally, he may face criticism or rejection from others invested in traditional gender expressions. Jung emphasized that this anxiety signals growth rather than regression. The discomfort accompanying shadow integration reflects natural resistance to psychological expansion. Like any significant development, integrating previously disowned aspects of the self requires moving through resistance toward new possibilities of being. The rewards of this integration are substantial. Men who successfully incorporate feminine aspects of their psyche experience greater emotional range, enhanced creativity, improved relationships, and a deeper sense of psychological completeness. Rather than being diminished by acknowledging feminine qualities, they discover expanded capacities for both traditionally masculine strengths and previously disowned feminine gifts. This integration transforms how men relate to women. No longer needing women to embody disowned aspects of themselves, men become capable of perceiving women as complete individuals rather than as carriers of projected psychological content. This shift from projection to perception creates the possibility of genuine relationship, encounter between two whole persons rather than mutual projection. The dance with shadows ultimately leads toward Jung's vision of the integrated personality, what he called the self. This integrated self transcends gender polarities, embodying both masculine and feminine qualities in a unique individual constellation. In reaching toward this integration, men discover not only healthier relationships with women, but a more complete relationship with themselves. Thank you for your attention, and we'll see you in the next video.